and answer questions for you and everything. So if you have any questions, again, make sure you put them in the Dropbox. And Stephanie, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Thank you, Wiley. We are now recording.
All right, sounds good.
I have a big sticky note, by the way, that says record, and I still miss it.
That's all right.
So one of the first things I did for you guys, if you look at your chat box, if you can see it, great. If you can't, don't panic, because TA will share this information with you. But if you scroll to the top of the chat box, I put a link for you. Will somebody test it for me, please, to make sure that you have access to the White Fleet program guideline book that I wrote last year? I want to make sure. Great. Alicia said it works. Bud says it works. Beverly, you guys, awesome. Good job. So yes, that is your copy to download and keep. For those of you, hi Maria, hi everybody. For those of you who are watching on your phones or you're unable to download it, I am going to show you what it looks like. I am going to show you. And all I have to do here is look at that. So can you see on my screen the Arizona School Risk Retention Sentence? Can you see that? Somebody let me know. Do you see it? Okay, good. Thanks, Teresa. So this, if you are unable to download it through the link that I put on the chat box, this is what it looks like. When you print it, it's just a, I don't know, 8-page guidelines. Before I get into this, three things. One, I usually teach this class in person to trainers who want to update or even start a White Fleet program. I usually take about 2 hours. I'm gonna speed right through this. So this is what I'll do. I will commit to you that I'll get through the program, through this information today, and then after the presentation, because we've got that hour, I will answer all the questions you need. 2, I want you to know that if you're a trust member, I know there are several of you in the audience who are not. We can work with it though. For trust members, if you would like the trust team to come out and work with you one-on-one to establish your White Fleet or look at how you do White Fleet program, that's what we do. The reason I wrote this guideline for you is simply that. Is this the Bible and the end all be all and the trust says we have to do it this way? It is not. What it is it's a document to get you thinking about, you know what? We don't really train teachers. We don't train coaches. We just, here's the keys, you can drive. The reason White Fleet is so relevant right now is because for every one school bus accident that I see, and I see all of them that are of trust members, for every one school bus accident that I see 3 White Fleet. And you know what that comes down to? Lack of training. Absolutely, lack of training, nothing else. So we're doing this today really quickly, but I commit to answer questions for you at the end. Read through this guideline. There's going to be a lot of information in there that you had not thought of before. Training folks, having a training program, drug testing, and record keeping are the big 4 things that you all say to me, holy smokes, yeah, we do this for bus drivers, but I never thought about it for the White Fleet. So let's go ahead and get started. Oh, rats, from the beginning. All right, let's get going. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We are going to talk about what a White Fleet car vehicle is. A lot of you use them for different things, definitions different. I'm going to give you a cautionary note. Who's eligible to drive a school district White Fleet vehicle? Certification. Let me tell you, Tom at RWC called me and said, Stephanie, what is this new certification thing? I'm selling these buses. We're going to talk about that. Program administration. Who should be in charge of a White Fleet program? All of you know here exactly who that should be. We're going to talk about training and training topics. What should be included when you start your White Fleet training program that I know you're going to do, because that's why you're here to talk about it. We're going to talk about paperwork. This is really no different than paperwork on bus drivers, to be honest with you. And then we're going to talk about what record keeping. Should we have record keeping in a White Fleet program? Absolutely. So what is a White Fleet vehicle? Here's how the trust defines a White Fleet vehicle. Any non-school bus vehicle that's going to be driven by district staff, volunteers, coaches, regardless of whether students will be on board or not. Already, are you like, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, what is a White Fleet vehicle? It's that custodial truck, maintenance truck, van that's being used for anything, whether passengers are on board or not. A White Fleet vehicle, consider it this way, is anything that has wheels and is not yellow. So I'm saying to you, all of these things apply to that type of vehicle. So if that's already changing your way of thinking, good. That's what this discussion is meant to be. And the reason it's important is because of the liability issues that I see right now with White Fleet drivers not having a clue how to back up in any vehicle, their own included. So it's important that we're having this conversation, and for you to understand, training needs to happen because there's a reason. White Fleet vehicles include maintenance and custodial, like I mentioned, assigned district vehicles. That superintendent who's got a swanky SUV, they should go through training. Vans and other vehicles used for student transport. Activity buses, our little mini white buses, and any vehicle that can be driven on or off district property. And you know why I have to have that last statement? We have lots of school districts in the state who use those little alligators, or what's another name for them? Golf carts, those type of vehicles. They use them to traffic gators. There we go. To traffic staff around. Well, guess what? Maybe bright green or bright orange, but the person needs to have some training, and they need some things to happen for them to successfully be able to drive one of those vehicles. So I hope you're already thinking, wow, this is bigger than I thought it was going to be, because it is. So here's the cautionary note, and the attorney made me put this in, but it's important. Although the state's regulatory scheme does not prohibit schools from transporting students in vehicles that are not school buses, schools should be very wary of bypassing our regulatory system for school buses that is designed to protect children. This down here, this AZ Attorney General Opinion 180-0, I want you to go Google that and read it. Why do I have this in here? Because we have lots of school districts who need to save money, and it's easier to buy a van than it is to buy a school bus. And I get this. But here's the thing. Bottom line is, vans are not regulated the same way school buses are. The drivers who are allowed to drive them are not regulated the way CDL drivers are. Pre-trip, post-trip, mechanical inspections, not the same. Requirements for driving and insurance, not the same. So I told you guys earlier, when you work with me, you know I will always fall on the most conservative side of the spectrum, only because I know what you guys are doing out there. So if you know that you are using vans or little white buses daily for routes, I want to caution you, and I want you to check with your risk manager that you probably have on staff with your district and say, hey, should we be doing this? The trust mentioned it. Should we look into it? It's going to change some things for you, because if you're driving kids on a daily basis that constitutes a route, it should be yellow. So finally, although the office has recognized that schools may transport students on activity trips in vehicles that are not buses, it is recommending, this is our Attorney General in the state of Arizona, is recommending that you use a school bus whenever possible. And whenever possible doesn't fall into the category of we can't afford a bus. Whenever possible means all of our buses are being used, we are in a jam, we've had an accident, we have one student who needs to get home. That is whenever possible, not because we can't afford to buy another bus. just so you know. Okay. Regardless of a vehicle type, manufacturer passenger capacity recommendations should never be ignored. And the recommended maximum seating capacity should never be exceeded. Why do I have this in there? This is very relevant. I'm on an email chain right now asking about needing to purchase passenger vans. And somebody in the email chain said, hey, 15 passenger vans are acceptable. They are not. They're absolutely not. The federal government has said do not use them. It's actually against the law for a car dealership to sell a van, a 15 passenger, 12 passenger van, to a school district once they know it's a school district. The safest mode of transportation is a school bus. So don't utilize vans in a capacity where you're overloading them. Say on a field trip, you've got 10 big football players. The reason the 15 and 12 passenger vans are a problem is because they're overloaded improperly, excuse me. They've got big guys plus their equipment. They're squeezed in. Those vans with the longer wheelbase have a tendency to roll over at highway speed. So taking out a seat in that van and making it a 12 or 8 passenger, that's not the answer either, because that wheelbase is still the problem, as is overloading or improperly loading them. So those big vans should not be used for passenger transport. And if you have specific questions for me about it, if you've got like specific scenarios, I'm going to give my email address to you at the end, and you can email. I answer White Fleet van questions all the time. Please ask me. So who should be able to drive a district vehicle? Well, let's talk about it. They need to have a current Arizona driver's license. So that new teacher or coach that you get who has a California license, they need to have an Arizona driver's license. They need to have a DPS level 1 clearance card. Now, for those of us in bus world, we know that our clearance card has a school bus number on it. It's the same type of card through DPS. It just doesn't have that school bus number on it. So most districts, though, today require all employees to have this sort of a level 1 clearance card. So this shouldn't be new to you. But think about that contractor, that coach who he doesn't teach. He has a day job, but he's a dad, and he comes in 3 nights a week and does soccer for the kids. He would be somebody that you'd be thinking, okay, well, he's not necessarily an employer, but he's a contractor, and we're going to let him drive kiddos. Guess what? This applies to him exactly. Make sure he gets that level 1 clearance card. Make sure that they've got a first aid CPR qualification. Most of our district employees already have to have that. But again, think about that contractor who is the coach for the soccer team. If they're going to be working with students, they're going to be working on district property, why wouldn't they have first aid or CPR? They're going to be surrounded by students. So there you go. A 39-month motor vehicle record. This is challenging for some of you, and you're saying, we don't do that. Well, here's the thing. Let's look at the next bullet point and then talk about the motor vehicle record. The minimum age of anyone at a school district who drives a district vehicle at all should be 18. You should not be allowing a 16-year-old to drive a district vehicle at all. It's a liability issue. They should be 18 if they're by themselves. But as soon as you start talking passengers, they need to be 21. There's a reason school bus drivers have to be 21 or have that 5-year experience. I'll say 5 years, that's more accurate. So if you are going to allow someone to drive your district vehicle, it's got the district name on the side. The liability insurance is on the vehicle through the school district. Guess what? You got to think about what kind of driver am I putting behind the wheel? We all know administrators who are very amazing. We know teachers are amazing teachers. They might be really crummy drivers. So the only way to find that out, to get that 39-month motor vehicle record. Now, I think I mentioned this earlier. If you are a school district, you are considered a government agency, and guess what? ADOT allows you to pull driving records for free if you're a school district on your staff members. So with that being said, if you email me, I'll give you my email at the end of the presentation. I will send you the link under, somebody said earlier, electronic data services. It's an application that you fill out. Again, you're basically proving that you are a school district. And you then are allowed to pull your driver's records. Now, DPS says you have to have a 24-month prior record of every driver. Well, 24 months, that expires every 2 years, obviously, so you got to get a new one. But the federal guidelines say if you have a CDL or you employ CDL drivers, you need to pull a 5-year certified record annually. A lot of folks don't know that. So do you need to do both? No. The stricter guideline here is that 5-year certified. So if you pull the 5-year certified record from ADOT, that meets the DPS requirement for our bus drivers. Now, for this 39-month, I am recommending that you do this. Again, you might have a great teacher who wants to drive students, but guess what? Really crummy driver. That's a situation that you don't want to have to answer later. Well, I'm the one who certified him. I thought he would be a good driver. Pass it on up. What do you know? When do you know it? And who did you tell? Well, if you know they're a bad driver, don't certify them to drive a white fleet vehicle. That may be challenging, but it's the only answer. Any questions so far about some of the eligibility requirements that I recommend to you? Any questions? Okay, let's go on. White fleet drivers should be part of a non-DOT drug testing pool. And I say non-DOT because there are two. We have the bus drivers, the CDL drivers are in that DOT pool. The guideline, the federal guideline is if you have a non-CDL pool, they need to be drug tested separately. So you've got your CDL DOT pool, and then you have your non-CDL, non-DOT pool. I'm going to show you something in just a minute. For those of you who say, my administrators would not let me drug test these folks. Then we're going to talk about that because I have a really great solution for you. Now, should you allow someone who has a DUI conviction 3 years ago drive a school district vehicle? No, especially not students. Now, does it mean they can never do it? No. The trust recommends that we've got 5 years between a DUI conviction and being able to drive a district vehicle. 5 years is enough where, okay, yeah, maybe they had one accident when they were younger. They slipped up, they did something foolish. 5 years is enough to say, they had a mistake. Okay, successful completion of white fleet training. What is white fleet training? Well, we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna get into what I feel really comprehensively covers you from a liability standpoint. Now, certification. What is certification, my friend? Well, it's anything you make it. I don't have a right way or a wrong way. I worked at a school district who certified white fleet drivers, and it was the best thing that a school district can do. A certificate is nothing other than something you've made that the driver keeps with them and that you keep on file. It tells you exactly what their name, when they went through training, and when their certification expires. I recommend that you send someone through training every 2 years. You know what in-service refresher training looks like annually. You talk about seatbelts in August and in-service, and in October somebody says to you, oh, I didn't know we did that. And you have to say, we just covered it at in-service. So every 24 months is what I recommend, that if you certify somebody, if you make a little, it doesn't have to be fancy. It can just be a piece of paper with their name, the date they went through, and the date it expires. Hand it to them, keep a copy of it. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can make it fancy, but it doesn't have to be. Now, say you certify someone to go through white fleet. Okay, great. They are certified and start driving. Well, can driving privileges be suspended? Yes, and they should be. How about if they say you've got an administrator who uses the district vehicle inappropriately? They take it on vacation. They take it camping. They take their family in it. Or they use the district garage inappropriately or district-owned tools inappropriately. These are things from a liability standpoint that I think about that you don't. But I want you thinking, okay, how rare is this? Well, it's fairly rare. We're in an industry where we all want to do right because we're all about the students. But occasionally there is kind of a one person who ruins it for the rest of us. Will you have to deal with this? Hopefully not in your career, but is it important for you to put a statement somewhere in your training that, hey, by the way, it's not okay for you to use white fleet vehicles in this situation. It's not okay for you to use the garage here for your personal vehicle. You can't use our tools for this. You might not ever have to deal with it, but you need to put it out there that oh, I would have never thought of that. Okay, that's good to know. So just cover yourself by putting something like that in your verbiage. And then unauthorized passengers, such as family members or friends or other individuals who are not pre-approved. Now, I'm not talking on a field trip. Say I'm the bus driver and I take one of my boys with me. Well, I'm going to ask, hey, coach, we're going to be gone for 8 hours and I've got my son today with me traveling from out of town. Can I take him with us? Well, that's appropriate to ask, whether the answer is yes or no. But can I just show up as a coach with 3 of my kids? Well, we got to fit these guys in. They're coming with me. I'm on dad duty today. No. Now, how often do you experience this? Maybe not. You won't experience it. But you've got to have that language in there so that we have to think for these folks. We have to provide the outlet for them to understand, oh, you know what? I was going to take my son. I better ask about that. Okay. Any questions about that? Program administration. Here's where you and I are the stars of this. Use a qualified trainer to train White Fleet stuff who's already an expert in instruction, defensive driving, creation of training materials, and record keeping. I'm asking you, my friends, who are the experts in the school district who already do this? Who is it? Well, it's our driver trainers in transportation. So what they need to be experienced in is classroom and behind the wheel and hands-on, because I am recommending to you that not only do you have a classroom curriculum, do you take somebody, a coach, a teacher, an administrator, through a couple hours of classroom. And I'm going to show you in a minute what kind of topics you should include. It also should include a behind the wheel portion, hands-on portion of training. And for those of you who don't do that, here's what I'd like to ask you. All the accidents that I see that come across my desk that are White Fleet tend to be in a parking lot or in a tight turn. And you know why that is? Because the white vehicle was taller than they thought it was. Because they didn't realize it was as big as it was. Or because they had never driven a vehicle that had crossover mirrors out in front of it. If that's the case, then we're doing it wrong. The first time, and you know this in our training for school bus drivers, the first time a trainee should experience something challenging should not be alone. It should be with somebody in the vehicle like a trainer, so that when they get in that vehicle and they have to make a tight turn, they know which mirror to look in for the duals, or a long van. Think of that brand new teacher who's just straight out of college and has never driven anything other than a tiny little car before. Suddenly you're asking her to get in a big van, or one of those white buses that have the crossover mirrors. The first time that type of teacher needs to be driving students or driving on their own is with someone who says, okay, let's take this out on the road. How do you feel? You need to back up. You need to look in your mirror, look over here. Let's do some fueling. So this already, I hope, is getting you thinking about some White Fleet training and what to incorporate. If you're not doing this, it's very easy to incorporate. You guys are the training experts here. Transportation, teachers might teach students. I hands off to them. I couldn't be locked in a classroom with students all day, every day. But when it comes to this type of training, you guys right here, hands down, are the experts. You should be in charge of this. Now, what should you have in your classroom training for White Fleet? Well, defensive driving, obviously. Accidents and emergencies. You've got to talk to your folks. If they get in an accident, what are the procedures they need to follow. Does your district have accident paperwork? Does it have an emergency protocol that it needs drivers to follow? Well, don't just hand a new teacher or a new coach some paperwork and say, here you go. In this training class, you need to show them, okay, here's our paperwork. Heaven forbid if you do get in an accident, this is what you need to fill out. This is who you need to call. Here's a contact list, that sort of thing. So you've got to cover that. What about a medical emergency? What if a student falls off the field trip vehicle? Well, there's probably an incident report to fill out. Well, here in the classroom is the time to share this information with your folks so that by the time they're actually in that vehicle, driving students, or they're a maintenance or custodial worker, say with another fellow employee in the truck with them, the time to know, oh, we've got some paperwork, you just cut yourself, isn't when it happens, but preparing them ahead of time. Pretty straightforward. What is a white fleet driver's responsibilities in your district? It's going to vary from district to district because each of your white fleet vehicle curriculums looks different. Maybe you are a district that only uses white vehicles for custodial maintenance. Well, those driver responsibilities are going to be different than, say, a district who uses, who has field trips every single day. So those responsibilities include, student management, emergency evacuations, that sort of thing. So my suggestion to you is spell out, okay, what do our white fleet drivers do here in the district? So what do we need to incorporate into our training? It's as simple as that. How about paperwork duties? Do your maintenance and custodial workers have to pre-trip their truck every day or once a week? Whatever it is, I'm sure there's paperwork involved. So who shows them how to fill out that paperwork? Well, what about field trips? There's going to be some pre-trip paperwork. There's going to be some post-trip paperwork. There might be some field trip. I had this many students, seating chart, whatever paperwork that you have involved in your program, you've got to cover it ahead of time. Don't let the first time someone has to scramble, okay, I know there's a sheet for this. Oh, what am I supposed to do? Don't let that be the first time they experience it is when it happens. Any questions about that? I'm going to check the time really quick, 3:20, okay. So what should be included in behind the wheel and hands-on training? Well, think of what we do for our bus driver trainees and mirror most of it. Pre and post-trip procedures. If somebody's going to drive students on a Saturday morning, they should be fully aware of how to check the oil, how to check the fluids, how to check to make sure all the lights on the vehicle work, how to check the emergency exit buzzers. Do you have emergency equipment on the vehicle? You've got to be out there on those vehicles. And what if it's a van? What if it's just a passenger van where you're transporting occasionally 1 or 2 students? Not regularly, because that should be a bus. That's my position. But say it's a van. Well, what kind of emergency equipment comes on the van? What do you incorporate on the, sometimes they come with nothing, so what do you add? Well, somebody needs to know what they have to check for. Okay, I'm driving van number 5 today. Okay, I know it's got emergency triangles, a body fluid cleanup kit. It's not regulated. Vans are not regulated like school buses, but what have you incorporated into your van program or your white fleet program? Whatever it is, whatever equipment you use, they need to be taught. They need to be shown where it is. They need to know how to do the paperwork. And then how about did I say emergency and safety equipment use? I think I kind of went into that. So if you've got it on the vehicle, you've got to train it. If you're using a little white minibus that's got the emergency exit door that buzzes, that first unlocks or won't shut off until you lock the door, you've got to show them how to work that, how to properly test it. And then of course, document that they did it. How about safe driving practices? I'm not going to dictate to you what safe driving practices looks like. If I was to be in a class with you, we talk about different things, but you already know what your meat and potatoes is for defensive driving and safe driving practices. So take that information that I'm sure is very thorough and just bump it over to White Fleet. Sure, you have to modify it. You may have to modify it a little bit. The verbiage is going to look a little bit different because you're not talking CDL, you're not talking some of the federal and state guidelines, but you've got the bones there already. So whatever safe driving practices look like to you, do incorporate those into your White Fleet training program for sure. How about passenger safety? So talk about that brand new coach who has a day job somewhere else and is just, friends with the principal of a school, and sure, I'll teach soccer, no problem. Well, if they work in the financial field, or they work in a field that has nothing to do with kiddos, guess what? You've got to teach them about passenger safety. You've got to teach them about who's in charge of the vehicle. It's the adult, not the students. If a student says, hey, drive over there, that's where my mom parks, 9 times out of 10, the driver drives over there and doesn't realize their minibus is this tall, but the solar panels are this tall, and they run into it. So teaching someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with driving students what their environment looks like, talk to them about passenger safety, talk to them about eating and drinking on the bus, what that looks like. The guideline should be none. Maybe water, but none. How about emergency evacuations? That's another big one. Don't put a White Fleet driver who drives passengers in the position of being worried about evacuating the kids because they don't know what to do. If we are mandated in bus world to practice twice a year, there's no reason that one time you do some training with what evacuation looks like. Sure, you've taught them the emergency exit door is here. You've got to check the buzzer. Now, if you roll over, here's the ceiling emergency exit. Here's what an emergency evacuation looks like for students. Talk with them through some scenarios of what they might expect. If they're in the financial world, doing their buddy a favor, doing soccer 3 times a week and driving this vehicle, it may never occur to them that might happen and that they might have to be responsible. What paperwork is involved? Where's the registration and insurance? Should they be calling somebody? That sort of thing. Loading and unloading procedures. So you might think, well, loading and unloading procedures really applies to school buses, but guess what? It applies to vehicles that are picking students up and dropping students off as well. What if in the scenario where you pick up kids at the high school, you go on a sports trip, and on the way home, one of the students says, oh, hey, coach, my house is on the way home. Can you drop me off? You got to have that conversation with anyone who goes through this program. You have to help them understand and see. Our policy is you pick up at the school, you drop off at the school, and then explain why. What if, oh, sure, I'll drop you off at your house. Turns out nobody's home at their house, so they walk down the street to their friends. The parents get home, and guess what? No student. You've got to think through this for them and explain scenarios and lead them to what it looks like to be safe when it comes to loading and unloading. Whatever your district procedures are, make sure that that comes over to White Fleet. You may have to modify it. Of course, you're going to modify it. But think about the scenario I just gave you. Hey, coach, can you drop me off at home? Think of any option, any possible scenario that might pop up. Now, when it comes to paperwork, does your district have a procedure for checking vehicles out? Well, if you do it individually at your schools, say a principal is in charge of checking out, say there's a White Fleet vehicle at every single high school. Well, who's in charge of that vehicle at every single high school? Is it still transportation? It should be. It absolutely should be. So if I'm a new teacher and I say, hey, I'm going to drive these kids on a music field trip and I need the van on Saturday, you should have some paperwork for me and you should have a process for me. I should have to come in and get a packet of paperwork that includes keys, that includes instructions, a contact list, a pre and post trip, incident report if somebody gets hurt, accident report maybe. There's no reason you can't use the DPS accident report for White Fleet. You know, it's a different process, but the bones are there. Go ahead and use it. Did I say emergency contact list? So when I check out a vehicle, I'm actually communicating with somebody at the district. Who's got band number 5? Who's got field trip bus number 3? Oh yeah, that's Stephanie Arbaugh from so-and-so school. She signed out here. She's going to bring it back Sunday at 10. Why can't you do that? You should do it. How about accident packet? Same thing as a vehicle checkout packet. You can combine a vehicle checkout packet and an accident packet if you choose. Again, this is not what you have to do, but what you could do to make it easier for any white fleet drivers that you have, including regular daily staff, maintenance, and custodial drivers. If they get in an accident, they know exactly, oh, hang on, here it is. I pull it out and it's got everything I need to do. You might even incorporate a how-to list. Okay, first call somebody. Here's the contact list. Call your supervisor, or if it's a weekend, call whoever's on call and make sure they have an updated number. Also, make sure you have the registration and insurance. That's something they should have checked when they did their pre-trip, but sometimes what I've seen is in an accident packet, there's another copy. So that when you're frazzled and, oh my gosh, we've been in an accident, I just pull them out and here they are. But if you're gonna do that, take it a step further. Who's going to be responsible for ensuring that those packets are up to date? Say I drove a field trip bus, a little white bus, and I got in an accident and I took out the paperwork and I was filling it out, and you know what, I took it home with me. Well, the vehicle checked out fine, there was no damage, and so it's back in service for another coach or teacher to drive it. Well, who is responsible for replacing the paperwork that I took when I drove it? So you got to be thinking, okay, if we're going to supply this and do this, then who's going to upkeep it? Well, in bus world, we are already used to doing this kind of thing. So again, transportation is a really good fit for this kind of training. Now, training documents. Okay, I've mentioned a couple times to you that I see white fleet accidents all the time. 3 accidents to 1 bus accident. And here's what I know. If I have to ask, well, what kind of training did that person have? Because that person at ABC School District has now been in 3 accidents in their custodial truck. What kind of training did they do? Well, I hope the answer is, oh, we sent them through 3 days of classroom. And okay, well, where's the paperwork? Oh, you know what? We don't keep paperwork. If there's an injury or it's a major accident, that's a problem. And you already know the guidelines are so strict for bus drivers for a reason. For a reason. It's liability reason. Well, I want you to understand it's the same for white fleet drivers. And I don't care if you're already thinking in your mind, ooh, my superintendent, there's no way I'm going to make her or him go through my training and then say, oh, by the way, you've got a really crummy driving record. Be prepared to have that conversation. Be prepared to make sure that anybody who goes through whatever training program you come up with, it doesn't matter what it looks like. You're seeing what I'm telling you are good bones for a program. Whatever you choose it to be, though, make sure that paperwork and holding on to that training paperwork is key. So say I'm a really crummy teacher and I turn out to be also a really crummy driver, yet I am allowed to take kids on a field trip. And I go through your training and I'm like, yeah, whatever. I have a van, I can drive these kids, no problem. And I get in an accident and I did something wrong. I did something wrong, even though you taught me during my training to do it a different way. I did it incorrectly. Here's what you have to be able to answer. If I say to you, again, I was a crummy teacher and I'm a crummy driver. I say to you, well, yeah, I did it this way, but where does it say I can't do it that way? Show me where it says you showed me to do it the other way. I'm going to win that argument every time. So keeping that training paperwork of what you teach, defensive driving and safe driving practices can be enough for those of you who like to, okay, what does defensive driving look like? Rights and lefts, backing and turning, freeway driving, spell it out. The more the better, in my opinion. But if you at least have, okay, so I went through your training on December 3rd and I had defensive driving, I had safe driving practices, emergency. You need to be able to show, you know what, Stephanie, here's your training paperwork that says we trained you on this on November 30th. You have to be able to answer that person who says, show me where it says I can't do that. I'm not sure you taught it to me that way. We know this in bus world, so carry that over to White Fleet. Any questions about that? So speaking of record keeping, so now you've got your program all set up. You've got some really good training. You've got a training route that you take on all your White Fleet training. They go on the freeway, they fuel because you have to teach them no fueling with students, right? You have them back in the vehicle, you do all this stuff, and you have me sign that I went through training and here's my certificate. Well, somebody has to keep that paperwork. It's just like in bus world. Assign it to one person. For those districts who have a White Fleet vehicle that staff is allowed to use, located at every single high school, say. So you've got 5 high schools and 5 activity buses. I've seen it done both ways. So the principals can be in charge of maybe maintaining the vehicle, or you can have one department like transportation in charge. There is no right or wrong way. I will tell you that when I see it done where there's a person in charge at every building, you know what tends to happen? Dates get missed, certification dates get missed, that CPR lapses, that drug test doesn't happen, that things expire, and then their 2 years is up, and 3 years later they want to drive the van. Oh yeah, I went through it a couple years ago. That gets missed. So I'm not saying you can't do it that way. If you choose to do it that way, make sure you're really solid on paperwork and who's in charge of what and what your guidelines are so that that doesn't happen. When transportation is in charge, we know that transportation's already in the habit of checking dates. Transportation's already in the habit of, is everybody certified? Do all of our vehicles have all the necessary paperwork? Transportation is a natural fit for White Fleet training and record keeping. Now, keep records a minimum of 5 years. Well, who says that? Not me. I did not make this up. But the state of Arizona says, if you are a school district in the state of Arizona and you do training, you need to keep paperwork for 5 years. The state of Arizona says that, not Stephanie. So if you're going to start this White Fleet program that's really comprehensive, you're going to keep their paperwork for 5 years as well. Now, for those of you saying, well, DPS only says we got to keep paperwork for bus drivers 2 years. Good for you for thinking of that. It's the strictest guideline. We have to go by the strictest guideline. And in the state of Arizona, it simply says, if you're a school district and you do any training, by Arizona state law, we have to keep our paperwork 5 years. That's something that you may have to change your process for. That's fine. But now you know. Archiving is allowed. Archiving means whatever it means to you in your district. Now, can you keep training paperwork electronically? Yes, you can. The federal guidelines say training for school districts and transportation and school buses and CDLs can be kept electronically instead of paper form, provided they are in password protected folders. So I've got my folder on my computer that I'm dumping all my training paperwork into. All I need to do is right click on that folder and password protect it. What that does is that allows someone who is going to use my computer to come on and say, oh, training, let me look and see what so-and-so is doing. Well, guess what? They don't have the password. So you can consider that when I'm saying to you 5 years. 5 years, you got to keep the paperwork. And then finally, establish one folder per driver and per vehicle. In bus world, that's not new to us, but it might be new to you for White Fleet. It's the same thing. The maintenance paperwork, anything done, accidents, stuff like that needs to be one vehicle, one folder. Same with drivers. You've got 5 White Fleet drivers. They each need to have a folder. They've got to have all their training paperwork in it, their certification dates. If they have an accident, same thing. So 1-1. We're already familiar with this in transportation though, right? So, oh, I think I got through that pretty quickly. Let's talk questions. A couple things. Carolyn says no cell phone use and stay under 65. So that is true. And I believe that when you go through the White Fleet Handbook, you'll see that that's in there. Now, why are those two things important? Well, now the state of Arizona says no cell phone use. Hands-free, I want you to strongly consider not to allow White Fleet drivers to use hands-free devices. Because if one of them gets in an accident, then we have to have that conversation. Well, what were they doing? Well, I was hands-free. Okay, well, what's your district policy? So first, check your board policies on what staff members' responsibilities are when it comes to cell phones using district vehicles. And if it doesn't mention anything about Bluetooth, I want you to incorporate it. Again, I've said this, I'm upfront about it. I'm the most conservative side because I see what comes across my desk and I see the mistakes that are made. Now, 65. Should school district vehicles stay under 65? They should stay the speed limit. I'm a little more lenient when it's like a maintenance vehicle, custodial vehicle, vehicle without passengers. But when it comes to transporting students, the vehicle should never go over 65. It's got passengers, and we have that state guideline for school bus drivers for a reason. Statistically, it's safer to be less than 65. So thanks, Carolyn. So the last thing that I said I had a solution for, if you are thinking, okay, Stephanie said drug test these folks. Yikes, I'm not going to get anybody to buy off on that. Well, there is a federal guideline, and it's in that handbook for you to look up. I spelled it out. I'm going to get it wrong. I'm going to butcher the name. It's the Omnibus Drug Testing Act of some year. It says, it's a federal guideline that says, if you consider this type of employee a safety sensitive employee, you got to drug test them. And then the Arizona revised statute also says if school districts in the state of Arizona classify a job as safety sensitive, they should drug test. So if you're up against administrators who say, oh, we're not even going to go there, I don't want to touch it. Well, the trust says you should for a reason. And there are two positions right there, the revised statute and the omnibus thing that I butchered right there. Those two reasons, if these folks are classified safety sensitive, drug test away, my friends. Oh, Coral's awesome. Look at that. Arizona revised statute 23-493. That will tell you right there. If you classify somebody as a safety sensitive employee, drug test. Angie says, thanks, Angie. Angie says, thanks, Stephanie. Time to revise and update our White Fleet training program. Again, I'm going to go back to this, not a Bible. I'm not saying this is how you have to do it. When your administrators say, hey, we need to do this, this, and this, now you've got something in hand that you can say, yeah, but we got to think about this, and this is really meant to be for you to start off the conversation and for you to say, you know, it's time for us to revamp. What do we want to consider? Is everything that I talked about for you, and can you incorporate into your district? Maybe not, but it gives you the idea of what you could do. So before we're done, does anybody have any questions while you have me here to ask questions of? You're welcome, Tiffany. Thank you. So Teresa says, it's important to secure any equipment or materials that may be carried. So that's true. So the newfangled buses, the newfangled mini buses out there come with, you can order them with something in the back that's got like netting for you to secure your stuff. Whatever you choose to do, if you're going to allow equipment on the vehicle, if you've got a little compartment or little area where you're going to secure equipment, guess what you need to teach them? A, how to do it. B, how to keep that emergency exit clear. Those little white buses have emergency exit doors and an aisle. Just because it's not a school bus doesn't mean that that school bus guideline is any less relevant. There's a reason we don't want folks junking up the aisle because of an emergency. Same goes for the White Fleet vehicle. So Thank you. Kim asked, can we find White Fleet program guidelines on your website? So I'm going to, Coral put it right here again, click on that link and download it. I am going to send it over to Jason so that he can upload it to the TAA website. I will tell you, this is a side note, Coral and I are working on a brand new trust transportation page that's gonna have anything related to school bus stuff, resources, all the stuff we're training. It takes a while to get it up and going. So we're working on that. You're welcome, Kim. Any other questions before we are done? Very informative topic. Thanks, Bud. You are absolutely welcome. My pleasure. Anytime. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So I will say goodbye to you guys. Make sure that you follow up tomorrow because the vendor stuff is going to be really fun. They've got different things going, and then the closing ceremony should be really interesting. Thanks for being here today. I appreciate you being part of the audience. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.